Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It by Gary Taubes. Picture this. It's 1934, smack in the middle of the Great Depression. New York City is a study in contrasts. Soup kitchens overflowing. Bread lines snaking around city blocks. Nearly 1 in 4 children is officially malnourished. Their hollow cheeks and thin frames a heartbreaking reminder of hard times. Enter Dr. Hilde Bruch, a young German physician fresh off the boat. As she navigates the crowded streets and cramped subway cars, working her shifts in local clinics, something stops her cold. Not the poverty, she'd braced herself for that. No, what catches her completely off guard is the sheer number of seriously overweight children she encounters. Really fat ones, she'd later recall with obvious bewilderment. Other European immigrants would corner her, genuinely confused. What on earth is wrong with American children? Why do they look so bloated? They'd never witnessed anything like this back home, especially not during times of such obvious scarcity. Here's the puzzle that should make your brain itch. In an era practically defined by hunger, how were so many kids packing on the pounds? This single nagging question launches us into a detective story spanning more than a century. It's the tale of one deceptively simple idea that completely took over the world, an idea so seemingly logical that we've constructed our entire understanding of health and weight around it. But here's the twist. Investigative journalist Gary Taubes reveals in his eye-opening book Why We Get Fat that this idea might be spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. For the past 50 years, we've all been handed the same basic instruction manual for our bodies. Want to lose weight? Just eat less and exercise more. Simple, right? We get fat, the conventional wisdom tells us, because we're taking in more calories than we're burning off. It's basic physics, simple energy balance. Gluttony and laziness are the villains, and a healthy weight is your reward for good behavior and self-discipline. But here's the thing that should make you suspicious. If the answer is really that simple, why doesn't it actually work? Why do we struggle so mightily, manage to shed a few pounds, only to watch them creep back on, usually bringing some friends along for the ride? And why is it that some lucky people seem to inhale pizza and ice cream while staying effortlessly slim, while others feel like they gain 5 pounds just by walking past a bakery window? Gary Taubes dedicated over a decade to digging through mountains of forgotten research, interviewing scientists, and boldly challenging the very foundations of modern nutrition. What he uncovered is a story that's been actively suppressed, conveniently ignored, and repeatedly dismissed for decades. And it completely flips a century of dietary advice on its head. Today, we're going to unpack that story together. By the time we're done, you'll understand the real biological mechanism behind why we get fat. Spoiler alert, it has absolutely nothing to do with willpower, and it's not some moral failing on your part. It's hormonal. And once you grasp which hormone is pulling the strings, you'll finally understand not just why we get fat, but what we can actually do about it. This isn't just another trendy diet theory floating around social media. This is a completely new lens for viewing your own body. So let's step into this courtroom of science and take a fresh look at the evidence. The charge? Obesity. The usual suspect? Eating too much. And the alibi? Well, it turns out to be pretty much airtight. Let's start by examining the crime scene, our modern world. We're drowning in an obesity epidemic. The experts keep telling us it's all about our toxic environment. We've got cheap, delicious food on every corner, and screens that keep our butts glued to chairs all day. Prosperity and convenience, they claim, have made us fat. But right out of the gate, something doesn't add up. If prosperity is the culprit, then riddle me this. Why is it that in wealthy countries like the United States, The poorest people are actually the most likely to be overweight. This pattern is especially stark among women, and this isn't some new 21st century phenomenon. Remember those chubby kids during the Great Depression we just talked about? Let's take a trip to Arizona at the turn of the 20th century to visit a Native American tribe called the Pima. Today, the Pima people struggle with some of the highest rates of obesity and diabetes on the planet, and their story gets trotted out constantly as a textbook example of what happens when a traditional culture collides head-on with the modern American diet of Big Macs and Coca-Cola. But here's the weird part. When anthropologists first visited the Pima way back in 1905, they were already shocked by how overweight many of them were, particularly the women. One researcher was so struck that he photographed a woman he matter-of-factly called Fat Louisa. Now, Fat Louisa definitely wasn't getting fat on cheeseburgers and Netflix binges. In fact, her community had just survived decades of genuine famine. They'd gone from being one of the most agriculturally successful tribes in the region to one of the most destitute, surviving on meager government rations of white flour, sugar, and coffee. They were dirt poor, technically malnourished, and yet paradoxically, they were fat. And they weren't some bizarre anomaly. Taubes digs up dozens of eerily similar accounts from every corner of the globe. In the 1920s, the Sioux, living in South Dakota, crammed into shacks without running water, subsisting on little more than bread and coffee, had obesity rates that would look familiar to us today. But here's what makes it even stranger. In these same families, you'd often find obese parents living alongside children who were rail-thin and obviously malnourished. Jump to 1950s Naples, Italy, and you'd find working-class women who were significantly overweight, despite living on a monotonous diet of mostly pasta, bread, and vegetables. They ate hardly any meat or butter simply because their budgets wouldn't stretch that far. Fast forward to 1960s Trinidad, where malnutrition was a serious public health crisis, and yet somehow nearly a third of the women were obese, even though they were consuming fewer than 2,000 calories daily. Again and again, this bizarre pattern emerges. Populations that were poor, physically active from sheer necessity, and sometimes genuinely underfed, were still getting fat. How does this make any sense whatsoever if getting fat is simply about eating too much and lounging around? Picture this heartbreaking scene. A mother in the slums of Sao Paulo, Brazil, cradling her thin, growth-stunted, undernourished child, while she herself is visibly overweight. If we stick with the conventional wisdom, we're forced to reach a truly monstrous conclusion that this mother is deliberately starving her own child so she can overeat. This flies in the face of everything we know about basic human nature and maternal instinct. So we've got a choice to make. Do we throw out our fundamental understanding of human nature just to protect our pet theory about weight gain? Or do we have the courage to question the theory itself? This mounting evidence strongly suggests that overeating isn't the cause of getting fat. It might actually be a symptom. But let's keep digging. If overeating causes obesity, then logically the cure should be straightforward. Just eat less. Simple undereating. But as literally anyone who's ever tried dieting knows, it's anything but simple. In the early 1990s, the Women's Health Initiative launched a massive, ambitious study. They enrolled nearly 20,000 women and put them on a low-fat diet. On average, these women ended up consuming 360 fewer calories every single day compared to their normal intake. Now, here's the math. 1 pound of body fat contains roughly 3,500 calories. So, if these women were creating a daily deficit of 360 calories, according to the conventional model, they should have lost over 30 pounds in just the first year alone. Want to know what actually happened? After 8 long years of diligently following this diet, the average weight loss was a whopping 2 pounds, just 2. And here's the kicker. Their waist measurements actually increased, strongly suggesting they'd lost muscle mass while potentially gaining fat. This wasn't some fluke or poorly designed study. Research after research shows the exact same depressing pattern. Low-calorie diets produce modest, temporary weight loss at best. People drop a few pounds in the first 6 months, feel hopeful, and then by the end of the year, the weight starts creeping back. The entire diet industry is essentially built on the foundation of this predictable failure. Why does this keep happening? Because when you semi-starve yourself, your body doesn't just sit there passively. It fights back hard. You become sluggish and foggy. You feel perpetually cold. Your metabolism downshifts to conserve every precious calorie. And you experience relentless, soul-crushing hunger. This isn't some failure of willpower or character. This is your body's ancient, primal survival mechanism kicking into high gear. You simply cannot fight it forever. So the first half of the magic formula, eat less, is pretty much a complete bust. What about the other half? Exercise more. Imagine someone invites you to an incredible, once-in-a-lifetime feast. The kind of epic meal you really want to be genuinely hungry for. What would you do to prepare? You'd probably skip lunch, right? And you might go for a long run or hit the gym hard to work up an appetite. Think about that for just a second. The exact same strategies we use to lose weight, eating less and exercising more, are the identical tactics we use to make ourselves hungrier. The belief that exercise is the magic key to weight control runs incredibly deep in our culture. But as one expert panel rather diplomatically put it, the actual evidence is not particularly compelling. One exercise physiologist shared something fascinating with Taubes. He'd been a dedicated distance runner for decades. Over all those years, he'd logged roughly 80,000 miles. That's like literally running around the entire Earth 3 times. And during all that incredible effort and discipline, he'd gained 30 pounds. He genuinely believed he'd be even heavier if he hadn't run. But he simply couldn't outrun his expanding waistline, no matter how hard he tried. A revealing study tracked nearly 13,000 runners over time. Researchers discovered that even those hardcore folks who ran more than 40 miles every week still tended to gradually gain weight year after year. To merely maintain their weight, the researchers calculated, they'd have to continuously add a few more miles to their weekly total every single year. A woman running 15 miles weekly in her 20s would need to be grinding out over 60 miles a week in her 40s just to stay at the same weight. That's not a realistic solution, that's complete absurdity. So why doesn't exercise work for weight loss the way we've been promised? 2 simple reasons that, interestingly enough, our grandparents understood intuitively. First, exercise makes you genuinely hungry. It literally works up an appetite, as the old saying goes. Your body naturally wants to replace the energy it just burned. A lumberjack, swinging an axe all day long, eats 5,000 calories and stays lean and muscular. A tailor who sits at his bench all day eats maybe half that amount. If the tailor suddenly starts working out like a lumberjack for an hour daily, guess what? His appetite will start resembling the lumberjack's too. Second, and this is sneaky, our bodies are remarkably smart and adaptive. If you burn an extra 300 calories sweating on the treadmill, your body might quietly compensate by making you slightly more lethargic throughout the rest of the day, so you end up burning fewer calories overall. You might unconsciously fidget less, or suddenly feel more inclined to take the elevator instead of the stairs. The total energy expenditure essentially balances itself out behind the scenes. So if eating less demonstrably doesn't work, and exercising more doesn't work either, the entire foundation of the calories in, calories out model starts looking extremely shaky. But the final nail in the coffin comes from some ridiculously simple math. A pound of fat represents 3,500 calories. To gain just 2 pounds of fat over the course of a year, which is actually a very common, almost invisible rate of weight gain that compounds into obesity over decades, how many extra calories would you need to eat each day? The answer is a mere 20 calories. 20 calories, that's literally 2 potato chips, a single bite of a hamburger, less than 1 sip of soda. If our weight were truly determined by consciously counting and balancing calories, how could anyone possibly stay lean? The margin for error is less than 1% of our total daily intake. It's like trying to balance your checking account down to the exact penny for your entire life without ever looking at the bank statements. It's functionally impossible, and yet plenty of people cruise through their whole lives, staying lean without giving it a second thought. This reveals something profound about how our bodies actually work. We're not simple calorie calculators or walking spreadsheets. We're complex, highly regulated biological systems. There must be something else, some deeper mechanism controlling this entire process. The conventional wisdom has been chasing the wrong suspect all along. It's time to reveal the real culprit behind the crime. The old entrenched model treats obesity as a problem of physics, energy in versus energy out, like balancing a simple equation. But Gary Taubes makes a compelling argument that this framework is fundamentally catastrophically wrong. Obesity isn't a problem of physics at all. It's a problem of biology. It's a disorder of fat accumulation, orchestrated and controlled by hormones. To understand this, we need to completely flip our thinking upside down. This is hands down the single most important paradigm-shifting idea in the entire book. We don't get fat because we overeat. We overeat because our bodies are being driven hormonally to get fat. Let that sink in for a moment. The cause and effect have been backward this whole time. Gluttony and laziness aren't the causes of obesity. They're the consequences, the symptoms of a much deeper biological drive. The best way to understand this is to think about a growing child, specifically a teenager going through a growth spurt. That kid will seemingly devour everything in the refrigerator, clean out the pantry, and still claim to be hungry. Is he growing taller because he's overeating? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. He's overeating because his body is growing. His system is pumping out growth hormone, which is sending clear instructions to his bones and muscles to expand and develop. This biological process demands a tremendous amount of energy and raw materials. So his brain responds by making him ravenously hungry and maybe a bit lazy, ensuring that energy can be efficiently directed toward that growth. The growth is the primary cause. The overeating and lethargy are simply the effects. Taubes argues that getting fat follows the exact same biological pattern. It's essentially a form of growth, specifically the growth of our fat tissue. And just like any other growth process in the body, it's tightly controlled by hormones and enzymes. Something in our system is actively instructing our fat cells to absorb calories and store them away as fat. And just like that growing teenager, our bodies must compensate for this internal energy demand. Our brain cranks up our hunger so we eat more, and it dials down our energy so we move less, conserving resources. So what's the specific hormone driving all this fat accumulation? The master regulator, the puppet master of our fat tissue, is a hormone you've definitely heard of, insulin. Here's how it works. When you eat food, particularly carbohydrates, think bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, sugar, your digestive system breaks them down into glucose, which floods into your bloodstream. This is what we commonly call blood sugar. High levels of blood sugar are actually toxic to your system, so your body has evolved a very efficient emergency response. Your pancreas releases insulin into your bloodstream. Insulin's primary job is to bark orders at the cells throughout your body, telling them to pull that glucose out of the blood. Your muscle cells burn it for immediate energy or tuck it away for later use. But insulin has another absolutely critical job that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. It is the principal fat storage hormone in your entire body. When insulin levels spike high, it sends two extremely powerful signals directly to your fat cells. Signal number 1, store fat now. Insulin activates an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, or LPL for short, sitting on the surface of your fat cells. Think of LPL as a tiny bouncer at the door of a nightclub, grabbing fat molecules passing by in the bloodstream and yanking them inside the fat cell to be stored away. More insulin coursing through your system means more aggressive bouncers, pulling more and more fat into storage. Signal number 2. Do not, under any circumstances, release fat. Simultaneously, insulin actively blocks the release of fat from your fat cells. It's essentially locking all the exit doors and throwing away the key. As long as insulin remains elevated in your bloodstream, the fat you've already stored is effectively trapped inside, unable to escape. So when you sit down to a carbohydrate-heavy meal, here's the cascade of events. Your blood sugar shoots up. Your pancreas responds by pumping out insulin. That insulin instructs your body to burn the carbohydrates for immediate energy, while at the exact same time ordering your fat cells to store any incoming fat and to hold on tightly to all the fat they already have. You've just entered fat storage mode, and the doors are locked. Only when your insulin levels finally drop back down, hours after your meal, can your body flip the switch back to fat-burning mode, releasing stored fat from your cells to be used as fuel. This gives us an elegantly simple, powerful law of fat accumulation. When insulin is high, we store fat and gain weight. When insulin is low, we release and burn fat. This means that any food that triggers a significant spike in your insulin levels is, by biological definition, a fattening food. And what spikes insulin the most dramatically? Carbohydrates. Especially the ones that are rapidly and easily digested, sugars and starches. Think about these common culprits. Refined grains like white bread, breakfast cereal, crackers, and pasta. Starchy vegetables like potatoes, corn, and white rice. And worst of all, by far, straight sugars like table sugar and high fructose corn syrup, especially when consumed in liquid form like sodas, sweet coffee drinks, and even fruit juices. These foods absolutely flood your bloodstream with glucose, triggering a massive, dramatic surge of insulin. This insulin tsunami locks your fat cells into storage mode for hours on end. Fat and protein, by stark contrast, have a minimal, almost negligible effect on insulin. Leafy green vegetables technically contain carbohydrates, but they're bound up tightly with fiber, so they're digested slowly and gently, causing a much smaller, more manageable insulin response. This brings us to the crucial, life-changing answer. The quality of the food you eat matters exponentially more than the quantity of calories you're consuming. It's not fundamentally about how much you eat. It's about what you eat. The science tells us clearly that obesity is a hormonal imbalance, not a caloric accounting problem. The driving force behind fat storage is insulin, and the primary dietary trigger pulling that insulin lever is carbohydrates. This hormonal model also elegantly explains why some people seem to get fat, while others stay frustratingly lean, even when they appear to eat similar diets. It comes down to significant individual differences in how our unique bodies process and handle carbohydrates. Some people are genetically predisposed to secrete substantially more insulin in response to the exact same amount of carbs. Others have cells that are naturally more or less sensitive to insulin signals and effects. This biological variability is called insulin resistance. As we age, or if we continuously bombard our systems with high-carb meal after high-carb meal, year after year, our cells can gradually start ignoring insulin's urgent signals. Our muscle cells in particular become stubbornly resistant. The pancreas, detecting that blood sugar isn't coming down as it should, responds by desperately pumping out even more insulin to force the job to get done and keep blood sugar levels under control. Now you're trapped in a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle. You're walking around with chronically elevated insulin levels. Your muscle cells have become resistant, so they aren't absorbing much fuel. But your fat cells, here's the cruel irony, often remain quite sensitive to insulin's commands. So where does all the energy from the food you're eating actually go? It gets preferentially partitioned, essentially shunted, directly into your fat cells for storage. Your muscles and vital organs are effectively being starved of usable energy, while your fat tissue is enjoying an all-you-can-eat buffet. Your brain senses this critical energy deficit and does exactly what millions of years of evolution have programmed it to do. It cranks up your hunger signals, especially cravings for quick energy carbohydrates, and it simultaneously makes you feel tired, foggy, and lethargic. You're being biologically driven to eat more and move less, not because you're weak-willed or lazy, but because your hormones are actively directing precious fuel into storage instead of making it available for energy and vitality. This hormonal cascade, insulin resistance combined with chronically high insulin levels, doesn't just make us fat and miserable. It's the underlying root cause of an entire cluster of related diseases that doctors call metabolic syndrome. This nasty package includes high blood pressure, elevated triglycerides, fats floating in your blood, dangerously low levels of good HDL cholesterol, and eventually, full-blown type 2 diabetes. And metabolic syndrome is a massive driver of heart disease, the #1 killer, and it's even been linked to Alzheimer's disease and certain aggressive forms of cancer. What makes us fat is also, quite literally, what makes us sick and eventually kills us. And the culprit standing at the scene of the crime is consistent: the easily digestible, insulin-spiking carbohydrates that have come to absolutely dominate the modern Western diet. Here's the fascinating historical twist. For nearly 200 years, this was actually the conventional wisdom. Long before anyone started obsessively counting calories, doctors and food writers like the famous French gastronome Brillat Savarin understood and wrote openly about how starches and sugars were uniquely fattening. In 1862, an English undertaker with the wonderfully ordinary name of William Banting lost a remarkable amount of weight following a diet that strictly restricted bread, potatoes, sugar, and beer. His personal story became so wildly famous and influential that, for several decades afterward, the common English word for going on a diet was simply banting. This practical knowledge formed the bedrock foundation of weight loss advice in medical textbooks for over a century. Then something shifted dramatically. In the 1960s, a new and alarming idea began taking hold in the medical establishment: the fear that dietary fat, especially saturated fat from sources like red meat and butter, was the primary cause of heart disease. This idea, though it was based on surprisingly weak and highly controversial evidence even at the time, somehow hardened into unquestionable dogma. Health authorities and government agencies now faced an uncomfortable paradox. If they told people to eat fewer carbohydrates to lose weight and avoid diabetes, people would naturally, inevitably eat more fat and protein to feel satisfied. But if dietary fat supposedly caused heart disease, then a diet that made you lean and healthy in one way could theoretically kill you in another. They made a fateful choice, a bet that would affect millions. They declared fat public enemy number one, and carbohydrates the heart-healthy foundation of a good diet. The U.S. government released its first official dietary guidelines in 1977, explicitly telling Americans to eat less fat and compensate by eating significantly more carbohydrates. The famous food guide pyramid, with its massive foundation recommending 6 to 11 servings daily of bread, cereal, rice, and pasta, became the iconic symbol of this new nutritional wisdom. And what happened immediately after this dramatic shift in official advice? It was at that precise moment in history that the obesity and diabetes epidemics began their relentless, accelerating upward climb that continues to this day. The modern research, when you look at it honestly, now overwhelmingly confirms what those old-time doctors knew from clinical observation. When you take people and put them on a carbohydrate-restricted diet, allowing them to eat as much protein and fat as they want until they're genuinely satisfied, and then you compare their results to people suffering on a calorie-restricted, low-fat diet, the outcomes are remarkably consistent across study after study. The low-carb group loses significantly more weight. Their blood pressure improves more dramatically. Their triglyceride levels absolutely plummet. Their good HDL cholesterol climbs up. And virtually all the other markers of metabolic syndrome and heart disease risk get measurably better. The science is clear and consistent. The historical evidence is compelling. The solution is not to fight a losing battle against our bodies with endless starvation diets and punishing exercise regimes that leave us miserable and hungry. The solution is to work intelligently with our bodies, natural hormonal systems, not against them. To get lean and stay lean for life, we have to control the one master hormone that drives fat accumulation, insulin. And to control insulin effectively, we have to control our consumption of the specific foods that trigger its release, the fattening carbohydrates. This means making peace with giving up the breads, the pastas, the rice, the potatoes, and especially the sugars and sweetened beverages that have become so deeply embedded in our daily routines. In their place, we return to eating what our ancestors ate successfully for millions of years of human evolution: meat, fish, eggs, nuts, and non-starchy vegetables. We eat fat and protein until we're genuinely satisfied, not perpetually hungry. This isn't a diet in the temporary suffer for a few weeks sense of the word. It represents a fundamental shift in understanding what constitutes a truly healthy way of eating for human beings. It's about identifying and removing the specific foods that are biologically programmed to make us fat, sick, and miserable, and then allowing our bodies to naturally return to their healthy, balanced state. The real fight isn't against calories or portion sizes. It's against the wrong kinds of food. And once you win that fight, you may discover that the struggle you've been facing your entire life is finally, blessedly over. What I find genuinely powerful and almost liberating about Gary Taubes' work is the radical reframing it offers. For decades, the entire conversation around weight has been absolutely steeped in morality, judgment, and deep shame. It's been framed as a story about personal failure, about lacking willpower, about simply not trying hard enough or caring enough. If you were overweight, the message was clear. It was fundamentally your fault. You were either lazy or you were a glutton, or probably both. This book completely reframes that entire crushing narrative. It takes the problem out of the realm of moral psychology and character judgment and places it squarely where it belongs, in the realm of biology and hormones. It says loud and clear that the struggle you've faced, maybe your whole life, isn't a sign of weak character or moral failing. It's a sign that your body is having a specific, predictable, and understandable hormonal reaction to the particular foods you're eating. This shift is genuinely a game changer. It means you can finally stop the exhausting cycle of blaming yourself and instead start understanding the actual system at work. The core lesson here, that hormones, not calorie counting, are the primary biological drivers of fat storage and release, represents a profound paradigm shift in thinking. It explains with elegant simplicity why the old, tired advice to just eat less and move more is so consistently a recipe for misery, frustration, and ultimate failure. It's like desperately trying to fix a flooding basement by frantically bailing out water with a bucket after bucket, without ever thinking to turn off the broken faucet that's causing the flood in the first place. Taubes' meticulous work finally shows us exactly where that faucet is located. It's the insulin response to processed carbohydrates and refined sugars. And this isn't just about fitting into smaller jeans or looking better at the beach either. The book masterfully connects the dots between our modern diet, the obesity epidemic, and virtually all the major chronic diseases plaguing our time. Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and emerging evidence even links Alzheimer's disease and certain cancers back to the same fundamental root cause: metabolic dysfunction driven by the way we've been eating. This dramatically elevates the stakes of the conversation, from simply wanting to look better to achieving genuine, lasting health and potentially adding years of quality life. It suggests powerfully that by addressing the hormonal root cause of weight gain, we're simultaneously protecting ourselves from a devastating host of other debilitating, life-shortening illnesses. So how can you actually start applying these insights in your own life? You don't need to transform into a perfect low-carb disciple overnight, or throw out everything in your kitchen tomorrow morning. Real, sustainable change starts with a few simple but genuinely powerful adjustments. First, and this is probably the single most impactful change you can possibly make, eliminate sugary drinks from your life completely. Sodas, fruit juices, sweetened teas, energy drinks, fancy coffee drinks loaded with syrup. These are essentially liquid sugar bombs, delivering a massive insulin spike with virtually zero nutritional value to show for it. Replace them with water, unsweetened tea, black coffee, or sparkling water if you miss the carbonation. This one change alone is arguably the most impactful step you can take toward controlling your insulin and transforming your health. Second, start paying closer attention to what I call the white stuff in your diet: refined flour products and starchy foods. This means things like bread, pasta, white rice, bagels, crackers, and potatoes. You don't have to eliminate every single one overnight, but begin consciously thinking of them as occasional treats, not dietary staples, or the foundation of every meal. Instead of grabbing a sandwich for lunch, try a big, colorful salad loaded with grilled chicken or salmon. Instead of pasta for dinner, enjoy a properly cooked steak with a generous side of roasted broccoli with real butter. The overarching goal is to gradually shift the foundation of your meals away from carbohydrates and toward quality protein, healthy natural fats, and non-starchy vegetables. Eat real, whole, recognizable foods that your great-grandmother would have recognized. And here's something important that goes against decades of advice. Don't be afraid of fat. The fat that comes naturally with meat, fish, eggs, avocados, nuts, and olive oil is not your enemy. It's actually what keeps you genuinely full and satisfied for hours, and crucially, it doesn't spike your insulin the way carbohydrates do. That was a summary of Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes. We've explored the core arguments and evidence today, but I'll be completely honest with you. A summary like this can only scratch the surface of the full work. The real power and persuasiveness of this book lies in the meticulous, almost lawyerly way Taubes builds his case, layer upon layer, with compelling evidence drawn from history, anthropology, clinical studies, and a century of forgotten or ignored science. It's in those accumulated details and careful arguments that you find the confidence to genuinely challenge what you've always been told by authority figures. This summary is your starting point, a preliminary map to a radically different way of thinking about food and your body. If anything we've discussed today has sparked even a flicker of curiosity or hope, I genuinely encourage you to grab a copy of the actual book. Reading it cover to cover isn't just about passively learning new facts. It's an experience that can fundamentally and permanently change your relationship with food and your understanding of your own body. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable and it gave you a genuinely new perspective worth thinking about, please take a quick moment to click that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next deep dive into another potentially life-changing book. Let's keep learning, questioning, and growing together.